Why did they ask her to walk into that room alone? That was the first thought that crossed Staff Sergeant Vance's mind when she opened the heavy door to Conference Room B at Fort. The sterile air smelled faintly of old coffee and varnished wood, but what caught her immediately wasn't the room itself. It was the way 5 massive men stood waiting inside. They weren't colleagues. They weren't teammates. They looked like obstacles someone had arranged in a deliberate pattern. She paused just long enough for her instincts to catch up to her senses. In combat zones, she had learned to read the invisible language of danger, the way silence tightened around corners, the way shadows betrayed ambushes, the way eyes gave away intent. And here, in what was supposed to be a routine evaluation meeting, her instincts were already screaming, "Trap." Stood only 5 feet 4, her frame compact, athletic, precise, and yet she felt the presence of those men tower over her like storm clouds. The former linebacker, his shoulders wide as a doorframe. Bell, flexing his hands as if even the table might splinter under his grip. The ex-MMA fighter whose gaze locked on her like a predator measuring distance to its prey. The wrestler, crouched slightly forward as if his body had forgotten how to stand still. And Dawson, the SEAL veteran, whose calm composure told more than all the others combined. He was dangerous in ways they were. At the far end of the semicircle stood Colonel Richard. His posture was formal, but his smile carried no warmth. Had seen men like him before. Officers who wore medals with pride but hid old prejudices behind polished rhetoric. His voice, when he finally spoke, dripped with practiced pleasantry. "Sergeant Vance," he said, gesturing toward an empty chair, "thank you for coming. Please sit. We need to discuss your future with this unit." Her future. That phrase always came with hidden barbs. She didn't move toward the chair. She remained standing, boots planted firmly on the linoleum, her sniper rifle still slung across her back. "With respect, sir," she answered quietly, "I prefer to stand. What exactly are we discussing?" For a fraction of a second, silence pulsed through the room, studied her with eyes that looked for cracks in armor. He saw none but knew what he thought, stubborn, insubordinate, small. He began to circle her slowly, like a hawk tracing wide arcs above prey. "Your combat effectiveness," he finally said. "Some of my senior staff believe your commendations may not fully reflect reality, perhaps inflated by the politics of the moment." The words cut like a blade. Had fought too long, bled too much, carried too many comrades out of fire to let anyone dismiss her record as politics. She thought of Iraq, the screaming chaos of where she had dragged Corporal Michaels through a collapsing alley while tracer rounds snapped overhead. She thought of Afghanistan, where a dust storm had almost blinded her scope, but she had still found the target at 600 yards, saving Lieutenant Anderson's life. She thought of nights spent with her rifle as her only anchor, steel, glass, wood, and faith. Her record wasn't inflated, it was carved into her bones. "My service speaks for itself," she replied, her voice calm though her chest burned. "Records can mislead," interrupted. He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough for menace to seep in. "What matters is capability, present capability, real-world effectiveness." He gestured toward the 5 men. They stepped forward slightly, their shadows stretching under the fluorescent lights. "These soldiers," said, "have expressed doubts about your ability to perform under pressure, against actual opponents." The setup was clear. This wasn't evaluation. It was spectacle. He wanted humiliation, a demonstration to crush not only her but the very idea of women in combat roles. His grandfather's voice whispered from memory, the gravelly tone of a man who had survived Korea's frozen battlefields. "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." Her pulse slowed. She had been ambushed before in dusty valleys, in alleys where shadows hid rifles, in villages where trust turned to betrayal. This felt no different. "What exactly are you proposing, sir?" she asked, though the answer was already written in the sneer tugging at his mouth. "A simple demonstration," said, his tone shifting toward mock concern. Hand-to-hand combat effectiveness. You against these 5 soldiers, controlled sparring, nothing elaborate. Cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp like gunshots echoing in the confined room. "Don't worry, Sergeant," he said with a grin. "We'll go easy on you. Wouldn't want to hurt anyone." The condescension was suffocating, forced her breath steady. She'd heard variations of that line her entire career. Go easy on her. Don't strain yourself. Stay out of the way. What they never understood was that those insults didn't break her. They focused her. Still wasn't finished. He let the silence linger, then added, "One condition. To ensure fairness, you'll need to surrender all equipment, sidearm, tactical gear." His eyes locked on her rifle. "And of course, that custom Wilson combat sniper rifle of yours." His fingers brushed the worn metal at her shoulder. That rifle wasn't just a weapon. It was memory. It was the dust of Afghanistan, the heat of Iraq, the quiet nights between battles when she had cleaned it with the patience of ritual. It was her companion through every mission that tested her worth. And now they wanted her stripped bare, reduced to flesh against muscle, will against size. "With respect, sir," she said evenly, "that hardly seems a fair assessment." "Those are the terms," snapped, the veneer of politeness cracking. "Unless you prefer to transfer. Logistics, perhaps administration. Safer places for someone of your skill set." The threat was unmistakable. Submit or lose everything she'd fought for. Looked at the 5 men. She looked at. Then she looked once more at her rifle, her silent partner, her proof of belonging. Slowly, deliberately, she unslung it and set it on the conference table. The metal clanged against the wood like a gauntlet thrown down. She removed her sidearm, her tactical gear. Piece by piece, she stripped herself bare until nothing remained but her uniform and her resolve. Each clink of metal wasn't defeat. It was transformation. Something else was building inside her, colder and sharper than fear. She turned to face them. She said softly, "I hope you're ready." Outside in the corridor, footsteps shuffled. Soldiers pretended to pass by casually, but their eyes flicked toward the door. Rumors spread fast on base. Something was happening here, something worth witnessing. Felt the weight of their curiosity pressing in. She didn't resent it. Let them watch. Let them see what fairness looked like when stripped of excuses. Colonel adjusted his phone on the desk, angling it carefully. He didn't bother to hide it. He wanted a recording, evidence of her failure, proof to circulate in conversations and whispered warnings. "Parameters are simple," he said. 90 seconds of controlled combat. Standard training rules. Sergeant Vance will demonstrate her effectiveness against multiple opponents." Almost smiled. 90 seconds, longer than most sparring drills, longer than she needed. She walked to the cleared center of the room. Her stance was loose, deceptively casual, weight balanced, hands relaxed, posture ancient. Not rigid, not regulation, but something older, passed from her grandfather's weathered hands to her small arms when she was only 5. Size isn't strength, he had told her. Technique is strength. Precision is strength. Knowing where to strike, that is strength. Now, as 5 men loomed before her, and phone began its silent countdown, heard those words steady her heartbeat. Her eyes flicked across her opponents one last time. His heavy frame, Bell's weak left side, his predatory glare, his forward lean, Dawson's stillness that warned of true skill. She cataloged them like targets through a scope, one by one. The colonel's voice broke the silence. "Begin." "How long does it take for everything you thought you knew to collapse?" For Colonel Richard, it began in the first 5 seconds. Stepped forward, a mountain of muscle wrapped in fatigues, his hands stretching wide to engulf in a crushing embrace. At 6'6" and nearly 300 pounds, he'd never failed to overwhelm smaller opponents with sheer size. To him, was nothing more than a formality, a demonstration to be concluded quickly, a little spectacle for the crowd forming in the hallway. But before his arms even closed, wasn't there any more? She had slipped sideways, light as wind through tall grass, pivoting with a precision that made his charge an instrument of his own downfall. One palm struck to a nerve cluster at his lower back, one foot sweeping his ankle, and his momentum became betrayal. His body lurched forward, upper half flying past while his legs anchored, flipping him in the air like a toppled oak. The crash shook the conference table. Papers scattered. Pens rolled across the floor. His laptop snapped shut under the weight of his chosen champion. Gasps rippled from the cracked doorway where faces now crowded, soldiers pressing to witness the impossible. Hadn't moved from the center of the room. Her breath was even, her eyes calm, groaned, stunned on the floor. 85 seconds remained. Growled next. Years of MMA scars carved into his knuckles, a predator who lived for the raw satisfaction of flesh meeting flesh. He circled, calculating, while Bell mirrored him, moving to flank. Their plan was simple: pin her between two storms, force her into a trap of fists and bone. Lowered her stance at the last possible moment. His punch sliced air above her head. She rose inside his guard, palm striking his solar plexus with surgical exactness. His eyes widened, shock blooming as his diaphragm spasmed. He staggered backward, mouth gasping open like a drowning man, lungs locked in rebellion. Bell lunged from her blind side. Didn't look, she felt him, weight pounding through the floor. One backward sweep of her leg caught his knee, precise, devastating. Bell's yell split the air as pain ignited nerve clusters and his body collapsed sideways, clutching the joint. 73 seconds, 3 down, 2 remained. The whispers in the doorway grew louder. "No way," one voice muttered. "Shut up," another hissed, but no one looked away. Crouched low, wrestler's instinct, patient where the others had been arrogant. His balance perfect, his eyes steady. Recognized it, the dangerous intelligence of someone who understood leverage. He shot forward in a flawless double-leg takedown attempt. Timing immaculate, form textbook. It was the move that had dominated entire brackets of opponents in college. But had been waiting. She stepped into his charge, not away. She caught his arm, pivoted, and used his own force to hurl him across the room. He hit the wall with such violence that motivational posters trembled and peeled at the edges. 61 seconds. 4 down. Only Dawson remained. He had circled silently while the others fell, his stance calm, his movements measured. He wasn't shaken, he was studying. Unlike the rest, Dawson wasn't arrogant. He was patient, dangerous, a predator who'd learned from real battlefields. His feint came high, then low, an ankle pick, fast and brutal. Against most opponents, it would have been decisive. But's balance wasn't trained in gyms. It had been forged on where one slip meant a plunge into death. She lifted her leg just as he committed. His hands clutched air. His body pitched forward, momentum betraying him. Her knee rose, bone met bone. The sound cracked like a bat against ripe fruit. Dawson crumpled, unconscious before he hit the ground. 49 seconds still on the clock. Silence crushed the room. 5 men lay sprawled around, groaning on the collapsed table. Bell clutching his knee, gasping for air, dazed against the wall, Dawson motionless on the floor. Stood alone, uniform unwrinkled, hair still bound neatly. Her breathing calm, her hands loose at her sides. She looked at whose phone still recorded. His mouth was open, frozen in disbelief. "Will that be all, sir?" asked, voice level. "Or would you like me to continue the demonstration?" The colonel didn't answer. His throat worked, but words betrayed him. A slow clap broke the silence. Lieutenant Sarah Montgomery stepped fully into the doorway, her phone raised high, its screen glowing. A smile flickered across her face. "I think that'll be sufficient," she said. "Especially since this demonstration has just been to about," she glanced at her phone, 50,000 viewers, including several officials at the Pentagon. The color drained from his face. Around him, whispers exploded into open chatter. Soldiers outside the door muttered, pointed, recorded. The spectacle he had designed had inverted, spiraling beyond his control. Allowed no satisfaction to show. She moved calmly toward Dawson, kneeling to check his pulse. He stirred, groaning, consciousness returning. His eyes blinked open, blood swelling across his nose. For a moment, clarity pierced the fog of pain. His lips moved, words only she could hear. "Thomas Vance's daughter," he muttered, "should have known. We need to talk about your father, about what really happened in the desert." Froze. Her father's last words rang inside her head like the crack of a distant rifle. "Watch the shadows. Not everyone wearing our flag stands for our values." What had begun as a spectacle of humiliation had shifted again. The fight was over, but something older, darker, had just begun. What happens when the story you thought you were writing gets stolen from your hands? Colonel Richard stared at his phone, still recording, as though the small device had betrayed him. He had imagined this moment differently. The video of a female sniper stripped of her rifle, battered into humiliation by 5 stronger men. A tool to silence debates in Washington, a cautionary tale whispered through training academies, a quiet victory for his cause. Instead, the image captured was chaos. 5 men strewn across the room, a woman standing calmly in the center, her voice measured, her uniform untouched. Not a victim, not an anomaly, but proof. Proof that his story, the story of strength belonging only to men, was crumbling in front of his eyes. The murmurs outside had become a flood. Soldiers pressed against each other in the hallway, trying to glimpse the aftermath. Some faces showed disbelief, others admiration, but all carried the same truth. They had witnessed something that could not be unseen. Rose from Dawson's side, her gaze cool, her voice steady as she addressed the colonel. "Will there be anything else required for my evaluation, sir?" The words cut like glass. Tried to steady his breathing, but the room had shifted against him. His men, the giants he'd chosen, avoided his eyes. Even, grimacing as he held his back, looked at with something closer to respect than resentment. Lieutenant Montgomery stepped forward, her phone still recording, her expression professional but her eyes fierce. "Sir," she said with clipped courtesy, "given the unusual nature of this evaluation, I thought it best to ensure everything was properly documented. Transparency, as per the new directives from the Pentagon." There were no new directives. Knew it. But the lie was clever, sharp enough to box him in. By the time truth caught up, the video would already belong to the world. For a moment, his rage trembled on the edge of his mask. But then he forced composure, straightening his posture, reclaiming his officer's bearing. "That will be all for now, Sergeant Vance," he said tightly. "We'll discuss the results at a later time." Nodded once, her face unreadable. She turned to the 5 men who had been her opponents. She said, voice even, "Thank you for your participation. I hope it was educational." Chuckled through the pain, shaking his head. "Educational isn't the word I'd use, Sergeant. Revolutionary might be closer." He extended his hand, massive fingers trembling slightly. Studied him, then accepted. His grip was firm, respectful, not dominance, not patronizing gentleness. The handshake of equals. Bell still rubbed his knee, wincing. "That was Army combatives," he muttered. "Where'd you learn that?" Hesitated. Out of the corner of her eye she saw Dawson watching her intently, bruised but alert. She chose her words carefully. "My grandfather started teaching me when I was 5. He learned techniques in Korea, modified for survival, not sport." Dawson's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, recognition, buried beneath fatigue. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Whatever he wanted to say would wait for another time. One by one, the men pulled themselves up, their arrogance dissolved, replaced by something more dangerous, curiosity. Respect was being forged out of defeat, and felt it in the way their eyes lingered, no longer mocking but measuring. She gathered her sidearm, her gear, finally her rifle. When the strap settled across her back, its familiar weight grounded her. His gaze followed her every movement, his jaw clenched tight. Beneath his anger saw something else flicker, not just frustration, fear. He leaned closer as she passed, his voice low. "This changes nothing." Stopped met his eyes. "With respect, sir, I believe it changes everything." Then she walked out into the hallway. The soldiers parted for her like water splitting around a rock. Some stepped back in silence, others whispered, but every eye carried the same truth. What they had seen could not be erased. The Carolina sun outside struck her face as she stepped from the building, Montgomery falling into stride beside her. For the first time in weeks, felt the warmth not as hostility pressing down on her, but as a kind of release. "That was incredible," Montgomery said, voice hushed but vibrating with energy. "I've never seen anything like it. Where did you really learn that?" Glanced at her, weighing trust. "It's a long story." Montgomery smiled faintly. "Then I hope you've got time, because judging by the notifications on my phone, you're about to become the most talked-about soldier on this base." Exhaled slowly. A story she hadn't chosen was about to be told in every mess hall, every barracks, every command office. But beneath that storm of gossip and politics, Dawson's words clung to her like a thorn in her chest. "Thomas Vance's daughter. We need to talk about your father, about what really happened in the desert." Her father's last warning rose again, unbidden. "Watch the shadows. Not everyone wearing our flag stands for our values." That night, she replayed the day in her mind from her small, on-base apartment. The silence of the quarters pressed in, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. She laid her rifle against the wall where she could see it, a silent companion standing watch. The fight replayed in fragments, crashing through the table, gasping like a fish. Bell's scream as his knee folded against the wall, Dawson's eyes clear even as pain him. But it wasn't the fight that lingered. It was the whisper. Her father, Colonel Thomas Vance, had been many things: soldier, strategist, a man who spoke rarely of his past but carried its shadows in his eyes. He had taught her discipline, patience, the art of thinking 3 moves ahead. He had told her once that the soldier was not the strongest, but the one who saw further than the rest. And on his deathbed, racked with cancer and morphine, he had gripped her hand with surprising strength and whispered words she hadn't understood until now. "Watch the shadows." The knock at her door pulled her from the spiral. She reached instinctively for the pistol at her nightstand before opening. Dawson stood in the dim light of the corridor, his nose still swollen, his stance weary but steady. "Sergeant Vance," he said quietly, nodding. "Lieutenant Montgomery." He acknowledged the younger officer, who had been seated at his kitchen table, laptop glowing with the video feed still exploding online. "You said we needed to talk," replied, cutting through preamble, her eyes locked on his. "About my father, about the desert." Dawson glanced up and down the corridor, tension etched into his face. Then he handed her a folded slip of paper. "Not here, too many eyes, too many ears. Old gas station 5 miles off base, Route 87, 8 o'clock tonight, come alone." Before could respond, he turned and walked away, his posture betraying nothing. Montgomery rose from the table, alarm in her eyes. "That sounds exactly like the beginning of a horror movie. You're not actually going to meet him alone, are you?" Unfolded the paper, read the scrawled address. She thought of Dawson's voice, the clarity in his eyes when he had named her father. She thought of her father's warning of sudden fear. "No," said finally. "I won't go alone. I'll bring someone I trust." Her hand brushed the rifle leaning against the wall. "Someone who's never let me down." How much truth can a single night hold before it crushes you? Parked her Jeep a quarter-mile down Route 87, behind the skeleton of an old billboard advertising a tourist attraction that had closed before she was even born. Kudzu vines twisted through the wood, swallowing the letters, nature reclaiming the lies. She killed the engine and sat in the silence, listening. No cars, no footsteps, just the hum of cicadas in the Carolina dusk. Her rifle stayed locked in the Jeep. Carrying it off base without authorization would have raised questions she couldn't afford. Instead, she strapped a combat knife to her ankle, holstered the at her back. Her grandfather's voice whispered in memory, "The battlefield isn't always where they tell you it is." The gas station looked like a ghost from another time. Its green dinosaur logo hung faded, the pumps long dry, plywood nailed over the windows. But's trained eye caught the details others would miss. Fresh tire tracks in gravel, scuffed footprints leading to the entrance, the faint glow of a lantern leaking through cracks in the boards. Someone was inside. She circled twice, scanning for shadows, for heat signatures in her mind's eye, for lines of fire and exits. Satisfied, she approached the door. The hinges moaned when she pushed, too loud, too deliberate. If it was a trap, it had already begun. The interior smelled of dust and oil. Empty shelves leaned like broken teeth. On the counter where candy and cigarettes had once been sold, a battery-powered lantern glowed weakly. Behind it, Frank Dawson sat in a folding chair, his face partly hidden in shadow, bruising dark against the bridge of his nose. "You came," he said, voice steady, though it echoed slightly in the hollow space. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," replied, remaining near the door. Her eyes scanned corners, shadows, the ceiling, empty, but empty rooms had betrayed her before. "I said I'd be alone, and I am." He raised his hand slowly, showing her empty palms. "Sit, Sergeant, please." Stayed standing. "I'll stand until I know what this is." Dawson nodded as if he expected nothing less. "Fair enough." For a moment, silence pressed between them. Then he leaned forward, wincing as bruises shifted on his face. "First, I want to apologize for earlier. I didn't know what was planning until I walked into that room. By then, orders are a hard habit to break." "Even bad ones," said flatly. He met her gaze. "Especially bad ones." They studied each other, predator measuring predator, neither fully trusting, both recognizing something familiar in the other. Then Dawson spoke again, voice lower. "This isn't about today, it's about your father, about Operation Clean Sweep." The name landed like a stone in his chest. She remembered the morphine haze in her father's hospital bed, his hand gripping hers with dying strength. They swept it all away. Buried it in the sand. But sand doesn't keep secrets forever. She had thought it the ramblings of a man losing his fight to cancer. Now the words burned with new life. "What was it?" she asked. Dawson inhaled slowly as though bracing for the weight of his own memory. "Officially, it doesn't exist. You won't find it in any record, but it happened. Desert Storm 1991. I was there. Your father was there, was running it on the ground." He paused, said nothing, letting the silence press him onward. "The briefing we got said it was a WMD mission. Intelligence pointed to a bunker near the Kuwait border, chemical weapons supposedly stored there. Delta was tasked to verify and neutralize. When we breached, we found no weapons. We found something else." His voice faltered, not from fear but from the gravity of memory. 16 women, Iraqi soldiers, trained in something none of us had ever seen before. Close quarters techniques designed to let smaller combatants neutralize larger ones. And they were effective, very effective. His chest tightened. Her grandfather's old lessons, her father's cryptic warnings, all of it began to align. "They weren't idea," Dawson continued. "The program came from us, from the CIA, back in the 50s during the Cold War. Someone resurrected it, passed fragments, and the Iraqis built on it. When we found them and his mentor, General, panicked. If those techniques became public, it would change everything. Women in combat would no longer be theory. They'd be inevitability." His voice was quiet but sharp, "So they erased it." Operation Clean Sweep. Dawson's eyes darkened. The women classified as enemy combatants, shipped to detention. The documents disappeared, and every one of us was sworn to silence. "My father didn't stay silent," said, conviction rising. "No," he argued. "He wanted to bring the techniques home, to train with them, expand them. He said burying them was cowardice, threatened him. 3 days later, he was transferred to Oklahoma, career dead in the water. Pieces slotted together in his mind, the whispers at Fort, the missing sections in training manuals she had stumbled across, her father's relentless push to teach her techniques far beyond regulation. And the knowledge survived, murmured, through him, through my grandfather, through me. Dawson nodded, exactly. Stepped closer, still wary but compelled. Why tell me this now? His answer was immediate. Because today changed everything. Meant for you to fail. Instead, you proved his worst fear. You're not just any soldier, Vance. You're Thomas Vance's daughter, using the very techniques he tried to bury. His pulse hammered, doubt flickered. Why should I believe you? Dawson reached into his jacket slowly, telegraphing the motion. He placed a weathered manila envelope on the counter. Because I've carried this for 30 years. Inside were photographs, young men in desert fatigues standing outside a bunker, her father, Dawson, and faces hard, sunburnt but undeniable. Alongside them, a small leather notebook filled with her father's handwriting, and a tape. Touched the notebook with trembling fingers. The pen strokes were his, the same loops and slashes that had signed her school forms, written birthday cards. Suddenly, the past was not memory. It was present, heavy in her hands. What's on the tape? She asked. The meeting, Dawson said quietly. The one where ordered the cover-up. Your father objected. He carried a recorder. Insurance. His breath caught. A part of her wanted to scream, another to weep. Instead, she steadied her voice. Why didn't he use it? By the time he tried, it was too late. His career was already finished, and its reach went further than you can imagine. Your father made a choice, protect his family, keep the evidence hidden until the time was right. When he was dying, he gave it to me, said one day you'd need it. Silence filled the abandoned store. Dust floated through the lantern light like tiny ghosts. Finally spoke, her voice low, so now it's mine. Dawson met her gaze, his eyes heavy with regret. Yes, and with it a choice. You could expose them, drag their names through the mud, or you could use it, leverage it, force them to change now, not 30 years from now. Tucked the envelope close to her chest. The weight felt like destiny. And you, where do you stand? Dawson exhaled, shoulders slumping. On the wrong side of history for too long. I didn't back your father when he stood up. I followed orders instead of conscience. I've carried that shame every day since. This is my chance to set it right. Studied him for a long moment. Trust was not a currency she spent easily, but the evidence lay in her hands, her father's writing, his voice trapped on tape, his face frozen in photographs that should not exist. All right, she said at last. We work together, but I lead. A faint smile touched Dawson's battered face. Wouldn't have it any other way. Your father would be proud. As they shook hands across the dusty counter, felt the weight of history shift. What had begun as an attempt to humiliate her had become something much larger. The truth was no longer buried. It was alive, dangerous, and in her possession. And as she walked back into the night, the envelope pressed against her chest, she realized something her father had known all along. Sometimes the shadows don't hide enemies. Sometimes they hide the truth. What do you do when the truth in your hands could burn down everything around you? Sat at her kitchen table, the manila envelope spread open between her and Lieutenant Montgomery. The small apartment was dim, the blinds drawn tight, the air humming with the faint static of the cassette recorder Dawson had loaned her. The tape clicked, word, and then her father's voice filled the room. Sir, this is wrong. These women are not the enemy. They are proof that our understanding of combat is outdated. If we bury this, we bury the future. Then another voice, colder, calculated, Colonel, this conversation is over. You'll follow orders or you'll be transferred out. Clean sweep means clean sweep. Erase it all. His fingers curled into fists against the table. Hearing her father's voice was like a blade through her chest. Strong, unwavering, exactly as she remembered, and silenced by men who feared what he represented. Montgomery exhaled sharply. This is dynamite. If this gets out, is finished. 2. Hell, the entire Heritage Warrior Foundation could collapse overnight. Looked at her eyes steady. And what happens then? Montgomery blinked. Justice, accountability, isn't that the point? Shook her head slowly. They'll call it a conspiracy theory. They'll bury it again, this time deeper. Or worse, they'll martyr. Turn him into a symbol for the very people who already see women as a threat to their traditions. Truth doesn't always set people free. Sometimes it chains them. Montgomery leaned back, studying her. So what are you saying? We just sit on it? No, said. She tapped the notebook, her father's handwriting looping across the yellowed pages. We use it, quietly. Leverage, not exposure. My father didn't keep this so I could blow it up in headlines. He kept it because he knew someday someone would need it to force change. Change from the inside, not from outside pressure. Montgomery frowned, conflicted. That's dangerous. Blackmail, basically. His voice softened, but her conviction didn't waver. War is dangerous. My father fought for something more than medals or careers. He believed dignity doesn't shout, it acts. If we scream this into the world, it'll be dismissed as noise. But if we use it to make men listen when they'd rather ignore us, then it matters. Silence stretched. Montgomery looked at her, then at the tape, then at the notebook. Finally, she nodded. All right, what's the plan? Leaned back, the weight of the decision pressing on her shoulders. We start small. We turn enemies into allies. Wanted to prove I didn't belong. Instead, he proved I can do what he fears most, change minds. Montgomery's brow furrowed. You're talking about the 5 men. Nodded. They came to humiliate me. They left curious. If I can train them, show them what my father taught me, they won't just respect me. They'll defend me. And when realizes his own chosen men are standing with me instead of against me, the balance shifts. Montgomery gave a low whistle. That's not just leverage, that's insurgency. His lips curved faintly. Call it what you want, but it's the only way forward. The next morning, before the Carolina sun had fully climbed the horizon, stood on an empty training field. The grass was still wet with dew, the sky a pale wash of orange and blue. Her rifle stayed at her side, but today it wasn't her weapon that mattered. Today it was her presence. Arrived first, limping slightly but carrying himself with a quiet determination. He said nothing, just gave a curt nod and stood beside her. Bell came next, knee wrapped tightly, a grimace on his face but fire in his eyes. If I can't learn how you did that to me, I'll never sleep again, he muttered and almost smiled. Followed, arms folded, suspicion thick in his glare. But he stood there anyway. Curiosity was a stronger force than pride. Jogged up, shaking his head. You threw me into a wall, Sergeant. I've been wrestling since I was 12 and no one ever done that. I need to know how. Last was Dawson. His nose still bruised, his gaze steady. He said nothing, but the quiet in his eyes spoke louder than any words. 5 men, former opponents. Now something else, not yet allies but no longer enemies. Looked at them, her voice steady but low. What I show you doesn't exist in manuals. It was never meant to. These techniques were buried because they scare the people in power. They level the field between size and skill, between tradition and truth. If you're here just to prove me wrong, leave now. But if you're here to learn, understand that once you see this, you can't unsee it. No one left. So she began. At first it was slow. She showed them stances, weight distribution, how to redirect force instead of meeting it. She corrected their posture, their habits, their assumptions about what strength looked like. Scoffed when she used his momentum against him in a demonstration until she let him try, and he felt how easily he toppled a man twice his size. For all his bulk, was the quickest to adapt. He grinned like a boy discovering a new toy when he managed to flip Bell with a move that required precision instead of brute force. Struggled at first, too used to charging headlong. But when slowed him down and made him focus on angles, his natural balance became a weapon. And Dawson already knew pieces, enough to recognize that what she was teaching was the missing puzzle his generation had tried to bury. He learned quickly, quietly, his eyes watching not just the moves but the philosophy beneath them. By the time the sun had fully risen, sweat darkened their fatigues. Breath came ragged, but not one of them left. Watched them, a quiet satisfaction stirring in her chest. For the first time since her father's death, she didn't feel alone in carrying his legacy. Meanwhile was unraveling. Inside his office, the colonel paced like a caged animal. The video had spread beyond his control, whispered through mess halls, replayed in offices, dissected in phone calls he couldn't intercept. His voice on the line had been sharp, accusing. "You assured me she'd be discredited," the general snarled. "Instead, she's a symbol. Do you understand how dangerous that is?" Swallowed hard. "It's one video, soldiers gossip, it'll fade. Not if she keeps training others. Not if she builds a following. You don't understand, Richard. If this gets out, the Heritage Warrior Foundation doesn't just lose funding. We lose control of the narrative we've built for 30 years. Stop her, or you'll answer for it." The line went dead. Sat heavily in his chair, sweat trickling down his temples. He had thought he was shaping history. Instead, history was slipping from his grasp. That night sat with Montgomery again, reviewing footage from their morning session. The younger lieutenant shook her head in disbelief. "You realize what you're doing, right? You're rewriting the manual without ever putting pen to paper. If the Pentagon sees this—" "They will," said quietly, "but on my terms, not." Montgomery studied her, then asked the question that had been building for days. "What do you want out of this? Not just revenge, not just survival. What's the end game?" Thought of her father, his voice on that tape, his warning about shadows. She thought of the men on the field that morning, sweat dripping, pride giving way to curiosity. "I want change," she said finally. "Not in slogans or headlines. In the way we fight. In the way we see each other. I don't care if my name is remembered. I care if the next woman doesn't have to prove she belongs by fighting 5 men in a locked room." Montgomery leaned back, eyes softening. "That's not just survival, that's legacy." Looked at her father's notebook on the table. She touched it gently, as though the ink itself carried his heartbeat. "Legacy," she repeated softly. "Yeah, maybe that's the word." How does loyalty change? By orders shouted from above, or by respect quietly earned on the ground? The answer revealed itself in the pale dawn light, day after day, on the training field behind the motor pool. Stood in front of Bell and Dawson, each man stripped of arrogance, drenched instead in sweat. At first they had come with skepticism, curiosity wrapped in caution. But now, after a week, their bodies told a different story. Movements sharper, postures balanced, breath disciplined. She pushed them harder with every session, demanding not just strength but control, not just reaction but anticipation. "Your body is the weapon," she reminded them, "but your mind is the battlefield. If you lose here," she tapped her temple, "you lose everywhere else." Once the brute force of the group, now moved with surprising finesse. He laughed when he realized he could redirect Bell's weight with nothing more than a shift of his hips. "Feels like cheating," he muttered. "It's not cheating," corrected, a faint smile flickering. "It's seeing what the other man doesn't." The brawler had resisted at first, hating the restraint. But when made him repeat a single counter 30 times, he finally felt the rhythm, and when he toppled with ease, his eyes lit with revelation. "It's not about hitting harder," he admitted. "It's about knowing when not to hit." Bell's knee still ached, but he refused to quit. Adapted drills for him, emphasizing leverage over explosiveness. When he managed to unseat during a grappling demonstration, his grin split wide. Guess size really doesn't matter. Always the wrestler learned patience. "Don't chase," told him. Wait, let them come to you. The first time he baited into overcommitting and countered perfectly, looked at her with astonishment. This isn't fighting, he whispered. It's chess. And Dawson absorbed everything quietly, methodically, like a man making peace with ghosts. He didn't boast, didn't push. He just listened. And when he moved, it was with an efficiency that unsettled even. He had the mind of a soldier who had seen too much, and perhaps that was why he learned so quickly. But respect wasn't forged only in drills. It came in the pauses, too, in the moments between sweat and silence. One morning, as they sat in the grass cooling down, broke it. "Sergeant Vance, why did your old man never teach this to anyone else? Why keep it secret?" Hesitated. The notebook's weight lingered in her memory, her father's words etched on every page. She chose carefully. "Because he believed the army wasn't ready," she said. "And because the men above him wanted it erased. They feared it, feared what it meant." Frowned. What did it mean? Met his eyes. That women didn't need permission to belong here. That strength could be taught, adapted, passed down. And once it was passed down, no one could take it back. The men grew quiet. No one laughed, no one argued. Nodded slowly. "Guess I'm living proof of that now." Back in his office, the mood was darker. Reports stacked on his desk. Complaints about morale. Whispers of soldiers skipping sanctioned drills to sneak into sessions. A rumor, unverified but spreading, that even junior officers had begun observing from a distance, curious about what the 5 men were learning. He slammed a fist on the desk, rattling his coffee mug. "She's poisoning discipline, undermining authority." His voice rasped through the secure line on his speakerphone. "No, she's rewriting authority, and if you don't stop her, she'll own it. Do you understand what that means, Richard? The Heritage Warrior Foundation is built on a single principle, tradition, and she's tearing it down brick by brick, using your own men to do it." Ground his teeth. "Give me permission, sir. I can end this. A transfer, a reassignment, an Article 15, hell even." "No," Stone cut him off. "Do not make her a martyr. That video has already spread too far. If she disappears now, people will ask questions, and questions are the one thing we cannot afford." Closed his eyes, rage boiling under his skin. "Then what do you suggest?" "Find leverage. She's not untouchable. Every soldier has a weakness. Exploit it quietly." The line went dead. Sat in silence, staring at his own reflection in the dark screen of his phone. For the first time in his career, he realized he was afraid, not of enemies overseas, but of a single soldier on his own base. By the second week, sessions had become ritual: dawn, silence, movement, respect. The men began showing up early, already stretching before she arrived. They no longer came as challengers but as seekers. They watched each other, corrected each other, built trust where once there had been rivalry. And in their eyes saw something she had almost stopped believing in: change. After one grueling session, as sweat dripped down their necks and steam rose from their fatigues in the morning sun, Dawson finally spoke what had been building. "You realize what you're doing, right? You're not just training us, you're creating a unit. One that doesn't answer to, one that answers to you." Shook her head. "I don't want soldiers, I want believers. Men who understand that strength isn't about domination, it's about balance." Dawson's gaze lingered. "Maybe, but to the men watching from the sidelines, you already look like something else. You look like a leader." The word struck her harder than any blow. Leader. She had always thought of herself as a survivor, a fighter, someone her father had prepared for the shadows, but leadership, that had never been her aim. And yet she could feel it. The way the others deferred to her without question. The way Montgomery's eyes lit when she spoke of plans. The way Dawson, hardened by years of service, watched her not with suspicion but with faith. Was this what her father had wanted all along? Not for her to carry his techniques like a burden, but to use them as a foundation for something greater. By the third week, whispers had become open talk. Soldiers in the mess hall spoke her name not with derision but with a kind of awe. She dropped 5 guys in under 2 minutes. She's teaching now and says it works. If she starts writing this down, she'll change doctrine. The ripple spread beyond the base. Civilian contractors whispered. Junior officers asked questions in meetings. Even Pentagon aides had started emailing for clarifications. And he grew quieter, more watchful, a man with power slipping through his fingers. One evening, Montgomery returned from headquarters with news. I overheard staff. They're terrified. They don't want to silence you outright, but they're already talking contingencies. Controlled narratives, they called it, which means they want to spin it, finished. Montgomery nodded grimly. Turn you into a story they can own. Package it, dilute it, claim it was always part of their plan. His jaw tightened. My father's truth won't be theirs to rewrite. She looked at the notebook again, its pages now smudged with her fingerprints from nightly study. She could almost hear his voice urging her forward. Not everyone wearing our flag stands for our values. If wanted to spin it, then she would move faster, build stronger, make the truth undeniable before they had time to twist it. That night, as the men left the field, Dawson lingered behind. The cicadas buzzed louder in the trees, the sky bleeding from orange into purple. You're doing something dangerous, he said softly. I know, answered. No, not just for you, for all of us. Won't forgive this. And he's not just a general, he's connected. Congress, donors, foundations. You think this is about training, but it's bigger, much bigger. Met his gaze unflinching. So was clean sweep, and my father stood anyway. Dawson studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then I'll stand too. He walked away into the twilight, leaving alone with her thoughts. The field behind her was silent now, but she could still feel the echoes of movement, the ghosts of something new being born. Not just soldiers, not just fighters, a new doctrine, a new way. And she knew, with a clarity that left her both terrified and resolute, that once it began, there would be no turning back. What happens when the truth grows too large to hide, but too dangerous to release? The question gnawed at every night, even as dawn brought more men to the field. What had started as 5 curious soldiers was spreading. First whispers, then volunteers. Men who had mocked her weeks earlier now lingered at the edge of her sessions, asking if they could join. She kept the circle small, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way. Truth always leaked. Montgomery had warned her. You're building something you can't contain. You know that, right? His answer had been steady, if not fully confident. Then I'll shape it before someone else does. But power, she was learning, was like water. It slipped through fingers even as you tried to cup it. In Washington, sat in a private office 2 blocks from Capitol Hill, staring at a monitor playing the viral video for what felt like the 100th time. Calm, her precision, the 5 men collapsing around her. It was a narrative he could neither suppress nor ignore. Too many eyes had already seen it. Too many conversations were happening in rooms where he had once controlled the agenda. Senator Carver had called that morning. This looks like progress, General, proof that our integration policies are working. Maybe we should invite Sergeant Vance to testify before the Armed Services Committee. Had forced a chuckle, but when the call ended, he poured 2 fingers of scotch and stared at the amber liquid like it might hold an answer. If clean sweep would be 1 breath away from exposure, her very existence was a reminder of what they had buried. He called. The colonel's voice on the other end was raw, frayed. She's training them, sir, every morning. They respect her now, some of them more than me. Scowl deepened, then stop her. I can't, admitted. If I move directly, I lose the others. They'll side with her. I need another angle. Find it, because if she steps foot in front of Congress with that tape or those notebooks, we're not just losing careers. We're losing the entire machine we built. The line went dead, but's glass remained half full. He drained it in 1 swallow. The burn a reminder that his empire, his decades of shaping perception, policy, and profit, was trembling because of one soldier's refusal to break. On the training field, had begun pushing beyond technique. She was teaching rhythm, breath, the kind of patience her father had drilled into her when she was still too small to hold a rifle. Anticipation isn't guessing, she told them as the morning sun crept higher. It's listening. Every movement, every breath tells you what comes next. Learn to hear it. Shifted uneasily. Feels more like meditation than combat. Gave him a look. Maybe that's what combat always should have been. Laughed. Tell that to the Taliban. She stepped forward, eyes on him. I don't need to. When you're centered, when you own your balance, no one can take it from you. Not the Taliban, not even fear. Her words hung there, heavier than she meant them to. For a moment they all fell silent. Because they knew it was true, they had felt it. That night Montgomery slid a flash drive across the table, pulled these off a shared Pentagon server before the files got locked. Looked familiar. Clicked through, financial ledgers, donations routed through the Heritage Warrior Foundation, transfers to shell companies, names attached, even a handful of congressional staffers. They're not just fighting policy, Montgomery whispered. They're profiting off it, billions over 3 decades, equipment contracts, training grants, all tied to preserving the old model, men on top, women sidelined. Equality isn't just a threat to their beliefs, it's a threat to their bank accounts. Felt bile rise in her throat. So it's not just ideology, it's greed. Montgomery's voice hardened. Isn't it always? Leaned back, eyes burning with fatigue and fury. She thought of her father again, the way he had refused to be silent even when it cost him everything. He hadn't died from cancer alone. He had died from the weight of betrayal. And she, his daughter, was standing in the same shadows now. Moved carefully, quietly. If demanded leverage, then leverage he would find. He ordered background checks, interviews, digging through personnel files, her financials, even her medical history. Most came up clean. Until one night, a young intelligence analyst hesitated in his doorway with a folder in hand. Sir, there's something you might want to see. Inside were transcripts of communications with her father during his final year. Emails, phone call logs, a handful of lines flagged in bold. They'll never forgive me for clean sweep. I only trust you, Em, you're the one who will carry it forward. Lips curled, proof of inheritance, proof that she wasn't just teaching techniques, she was carrying contraband knowledge from a buried operation. It wasn't enough to bury her yet, but it was a crack, and cracks under pressure could be widened. Meanwhile, Dawson found himself caught in a war he hadn't expected. He lingered after drills, speaking with more than the others. His voice grew heavier with each passing day, as though unburdening years of silence. I should have stood with your father, he admitted one evening as they sat on the bleachers, the air cooling around them. He asked me to, he said, if we don't, men like will write history in their image. But I stayed quiet. I told myself it was survival. Truth is, I was a coward. Looked at him, you're standing now. Am I, his gaze searched hers, or am I just too late? She didn't answer right away. She thought of the tape, of her father's voice immortalized in plastic reels. She thought of the men sweating on the field, learning not just techniques but trust. Late or not, she said finally, you're here, that's enough. But as she spoke, doubt flickered. Was it enough? Or were they building a fragile circle that could shatter with one strike? By the end of the month, rumors reached that Pentagon aides were monitoring her sessions through drone footage. That journalists had filed FOIA requests about her evaluation. That had been spotted leaving meetings with lobbyists wearing expressions too tense to hide. The shadows were stirring again. Montgomery put it bluntly one evening. You can't hold this in the dark forever. Either you go public on your terms or someone else will do it for you. And if that happens... Finished the thought, My father's truth becomes their weapon. She looked out the window of her apartment across the darkened base. Soldiers walked in pairs. Trucks rumbled down gravel roads. The machinery of the army churned on, oblivious. But she felt it, the ground shifting, the storm building. Sometimes she swore she could almost hear her father's voice again. Not from memory, but carried on the wind. The shadows aren't hiding you, they're waiting for you. And she knew the waiting was nearly over. What does victory look like when the battlefield isn't marked by sand or blood, but by silence and shadows? For it began with a summons. Colonel's aide appeared at her door just after dusk, his uniform too neat, his tone too clipped. The colonel would like to see you, immediately. Knew the weeks of whispers, the quiet escalation, the surveillance. This was the moment it all converged. She holstered her, slid her father's notebook into her jacket pocket and followed. The walk across base was quiet, almost eerily so. Soldiers milled in the distance, but none met her eye. The air felt heavy, charged, as though the entire post held its breath. When she entered his office, he was alone. No aides, no guards, just him, seated behind his desk, a decanter of bourbon half empty at his side. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight. "Sit," he ordered. "Remain standing." Lip curled, still disobedient, still arrogant. She said nothing. Silence, she had learned, was a weapon sharper than words. Finally he stood, packing slowly around the desk. "Do you know what you've done? You've undermined the chain of command. You've poisoned my men. You've jeopardized the integrity of this entire installation." His eyes locked on his. "No, I've reminded them what integrity means." The words landed harder than she expected. His hand twitched, almost reaching for the bourbon, then stopping. His voice dropped, low and bitter. "You think you're righteous, but you don't understand the scale, the politics, the money. Men like me, we've spent decades shaping this institution. Do you think we'll let it unravel because of you?" Pulled the manila envelope from her jacket and placed it on his desk. The photographs, the notebook, the cassette. "You already let it unravel," she said quietly. 30 years ago, when you buried Operation Clean Sweep, when you tried to erase the women who proved you wrong." Froze, his face paled, then flushed red. "Where did you?" "My father left it for me, and Dawson confirmed the rest." At the mention of Dawson's, rage boiled over. "That traitor, that coward, You should listened," cut in. Her voice was calm, steady, even as her pulse thundered in her ears. "But you didn't, and now everything you tried to hide is sitting right here." He stared at the envelope like it was a live grenade. Leaned forward slightly. "I don't want headlines, I don't want scandals. I want change, real change, and you're going to give it to me." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "You think you can blackmail me?" Her answer was soft but lethal. "I don't need to blackmail you. I just need to give this to the wrong person. And you know as well as I do, won't protect you if it means protecting himself. He'll let you burn. He'll feed you to the wolves before he lets his empire crumble." For the first time, she saw fear flash in his eyes. It was then she realized wasn't a monster. He was a man. A man who had traded conscience for power so long ago he no longer knew the difference. And like all men clinging to power, his greatest terror was losing it. "You don't have to lose everything," she said softly, "but you do have to change, starting now." The silence stretched. Finally, slumped back into his chair, his hand trembling slightly as he poured a glass of bourbon. He didn't offer her one. "What do you want?" he muttered. His answer was simple. "I want training, open, documented. The techniques my father carried, the ones you tried to erase. They belong in the Army's doctrine, not in shadows. You'll authorize it, you'll support it, and you'll make sure it isn't buried again." He stared at her for a long moment, then he laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "And if I say no?" Picked up the cassette, held it between two fingers. "Then this voice goes public." She clicked the recorder on. Her father's words filled the room once again. "Sir, this is wrong. These women are not the enemy. They are proof that our understanding of combat is outdated." Flinched, his hand shook as he grabbed the bourbon, drained it in one swallow. When he looked back at her, the defiance in his eyes had dimmed. "You think this will end with me?" he asked bitterly. "Won't let you win?" Pocketed the tape. "Maybe not, but I don't need to win. I just need the next woman to never fight this battle alone again." By the following week, the field was no longer a secret. Soldiers arrived in groups, sometimes dozens. Some watched, some trained. Some simply stood at the edge as though needing only to see that it was possible. Bell and Dawson became her anchors. They no longer trained just for themselves, but for those watching, demonstrating, correcting, encouraging. Where once there had been rivalry, now there was brotherhood and, more startlingly, respect for the woman who had forced them to change. Montgomery filmed everything, quietly, carefully, not for the Pentagon, but for history. One evening, as reviewed the footage, Montgomery said softly, "Do you realize what this is? You're building a doctrine, a culture. They won't be able to erase this even if they try. Too many people have seen it." Closed the notebook, her father's handwriting still warm beneath her fingers. "That's all I wanted, to make sure his truth lived longer than their lies." In Washington, received report with a scowl. "Training integration," the colonel had written. "Innovative techniques being adopted. Sergeant Vance's methods proving effective. Recommend expansion." It was a concession disguised as progress. Hated it, but he knew better than to fight a narrative already spreading. So he signed it and the wheels began to turn. Funding requests, pilot programs, doctrine reviews, not because believed in it, but because he feared losing control entirely. And so, the very system that had buried his father's legacy began resurrecting it, unknowingly validating the man they had once tried to silence. The last time returned to the gas station, she went alone. The building still leaned against the wind, the lantern long gone, the dust undisturbed. She sat on the cracked steps and listened to the cicadas. Her father's tape was in her pocket, his notebook in her bag, his voice in her memory. She spoke aloud, though no one was there to hear. "They couldn't erase you. They tried, but you're still here, every move, every word, every soldier who learns what you taught me." Her throat tightened, tears burned, but she let them fall. "Sometimes I hated you for leaving me this burden, but now I understand. It wasn't a burden, it was a seed." She stood, brushing dust from her fatigues, the weight in her chest lighter than it had been in years. As she walked back into the night, she realized something her father had known all along. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.